Hey, welcome to an episode of Quarter Tones. My name is Mikey Mhanna. Today on the series we have Ronnie Malley. Ronnie is a musician and a musicologist, double threat, based in Chicago, but has performed really all over the world and has worked with some of my favorite artists and probably some of your favorite artists. He's an oud player and is just finished being part of the Oud Festival, I believe it's called. So I'm excited for Ronnie to be a part of the series. Ronnie, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having Mikey.
So my first introduction to your work was seeing you on stage with Omar Offendum with the little Syria project. That's kind of how I sort of fell into your work. Maybe you can give everybody listening a sort of a background on like your initiation into music. When did you first start playing? Do you think of yourself as a oud player first and foremost?
I think of myself as a musician. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. My musical journey really began in grade school when I was a percussionist in the school band. And my father and my brother are both musicians, and so we kind of followed that path. There were always instruments strewn about the house everywhere, and I'd pick something up and start playing. And one of the Middle Eastern instruments that I picked up and started playing very often was the Egyptian tambourine, the riq. And from there, I just kind of went and started to really get into music. And my dad saw that, and he asked if I would like, to do something with band. And so I said, yeah. And he went and got me a snare drum, and I started playing with the orchestra in the band. And then I kind of went to continue to do that throughout school. And my dad then, I kind of went up to him and I said, he took me, he used to have a nightclub, he and his bandmates, because he had a band and he was a professional musician. And of course, the nightclub was called Cleopatra.
Nice, nailed
And
it.
totally. And so we would go every weekend with him and watch the band play and it was really an experience to see music live, to experience it live, and it really inspired me to want to play more. And I saw the guitarist on the stage, and it was interesting because I'd like to just make a point that I grew up in Chicago, and Chicago is a very Arab diverse place. So just to give you an idea, his bandmates, the drummer was Vahi Zakarian, who is Iraqi Armenian, and whose brother Papkin Zakarian used to be the drummer for Qadam Seher for many, many years. The guitarist and the keyboardist were both Iraqi Assyrian. My dad's Palestinian, the singer was Lebanese, and the violinist was Syrian. And so it was this kind of like pan-Arab musical experience. But if I look back at it, I realize, boy, there's a representation of such diversity in cultures here. And so after a while, I saw the guitar and I said, we all play percussion in this family because my dad and brother are both percussionists. I said, one of us needs to play melody, guys. And so I picked up the guitar. And it all started like my dad would take us to the clubs. We played at one club downtown, not downtown, but near Lincoln Square in Chicago called Beirut, in Albany Park, sorry, called Beirut at Night, Layali Beirut. And he would take us there and ask my brother and I to get up and do like a guitar tabla duo while they would take their break as a band. And so we did. We would do all of this like Omar Khurshid music from Egypt and just a variety of different things, some Fairuz songs. And slowly but surely, that was our foray into really being on stage. And then little after that, my dad said, if you switch to playing keyboards, we can really be a kind of a band that takes on a lot of work, because the keyboard in Middle Eastern music is basically, it's kind of like a leading instrument. And so I did, and I studied keys for about a year and a half. And my dad's friend Vahi, the drummer I was telling you about, said, listen, if you learn 10 songs you can come on stage and play with us on keyboards. I said, sure. And he said, I'll even give you this organ. And it was this huge double-decker Farfisa organ, like the kind that you see Majdi Hosseini playing with, Abdul Halim Hafiz and stuff. And so I did. And I shared the stage on keys for the first time with my dad's band, which also included the wonderful, well-known Lebanese composer Walid Shakir. And Walid Shakir was a composer for Tony Hanna and a variety of other Lebanese singers. And he was a regular Chicago musician here and part of my dad's band. And after that, I just became kind of known as a keyboardist. And we played thousands of weddings, and I don't exaggerate by saying that. Like, from the age of 12 to my 30s, I was playing nothing but weddings, Arab weddings, festivals, clubs, because we were
Wait,
an
you said
established...
thousands?
I'm not kidding you. Almost every week, sometimes we did 2 events in one day. And I mean, we're talking about, a span of 20 years. So, I mean, I'm not kidding you. I could say at least 1,000 weddings, and I'm not exaggerating.
Okay, so I have to ask you, how many, how big a set list did you have to play thousands of weddings? Did you just play the same, 40 songs over and over and over again? Do you hate those songs? Are they the stuff of nightmares?
Kind of sometimes, it's like knowing this regular repertoire. When you're a jobber and you're on the club and wedding circuit, it can be a very competitive environment, which ups your game and makes you kind of come up with new things and different things. But you also followed the trends, what was new in the music. For example, if we were doing, Palestinian weddings, we were listening to Shafiq Kabha and Ra'ad Kabha and a lot of stuff that was coming out of the wedding scene from there. If we were playing at Egyptian weddings, they would have a particular repertoire, so we had a slew of Egyptian repertoire.
Okay, hold on, Ronnie. I can't help you. You're holding oud. I could feel I could feel the songs coming through your fingers. Can you just show me, if you'll humor me, please? What are the go-to, if you can play snippets of the go-to songs from an Egyptian wedding, from a Palestinian wedding, from this 20-year part of your past?
Man, I'm going to date
Take us
myself
through
now.
a musical collage of what it looks like to play wedding.
I'm definitely going to date myself right now. I'll tell you that much.
Great, go for it. The older, the better.
One of the more popular ones was قلبي عشقها والعيون هويتها واهلا ما يردون كل ما اشتقت ليها اروح واسال عليها كل ما اشتقت ليها اروح واسال عليها
Of course.
نسم علينا الهوى من مفرع الوادي جانا الهوى وجانا ورمانا الهوى رمانا وجانا الهوى وجانا ورمانا الهوى رمانا يا ظريف الطول وقفت كلك رايح على الغربي وبلادك احسن لك خايف يا ظريف تروح وتتملك وتعاشي للغير وتنساني انا I mean مرسول الحب فين مشيتي وفين غبتي علينا خايف لا تكون نسيتينا وهجرتينا وحالف ما تعود I mean, it was a gamut of everything,
Yeah. Are there, first of all, thanks so much for doing that. That's so much fun. Are there, were there rivalries between different Arab wedding bands, basically? And sort of regional pride, Chicago Arab wedding bands are really the best in the world. We're better than those in London. We're better than those in France. We're better than those terrible Canadian ones and the LA ones, and,
You know,
and especially the ones in Beirut and the ones like. Is there regional
you know,
turf war?
for me, growing up as an Arab American, like being born here, what sociologists would say second generation, I guess. I mean, it was all, all up for grabs for me. You know, we played at a variety of different Arab Christian churches, for example. I was exposed to a very Arab Christian environment, even though we grew up in a Muslim household. I got to be very good friends with many different priests from various denominations. We played, Melkite, Maronite, Orthodox, Catholic churches for a variety of different groups of people. And each one, we had different singers, we had different musicians joining us, and it was so diverse, it was hard to say, which bands were the best. I will say, though, that we did often go to Detroit to check out some of the bands in Dearborn Heights, and we really thought very highly of them. There were some bands that were coming from places like California and Florida, but we were all just enjoying. I mean, it's not like there's such a ubiquity of Arab musicians in the United States that it would even feel like competition. So,
Yeah.
well, whenever people would come from overseas, I mean, you have to keep in mind I grew up in an environment that was before the internet, and before the internet, the only way really that I was able to engage this music was either playing it live with my dad and his bandmates, or if people were coming to visit from overseas. Like we had the benefit in playing these clubs with my dad, playing with really well-renowned singers like Kadhim al-Sahir, Najwa Karam, Melham Barakat, Tony Hanna, Majdi al-Husseini, and it really left an impression. And I have to really give a shout out to the musicians that were coming from overseas, because I would sit down and have these like mini master classes with them, these mini apprenticeships, and that was the way you learned the music. But the oud, I would have to say, I came to after I discovered Simone Shaheen. I played with some of his relatives here in Chicago, one oud player, and he said, you have to know Simone, you have to know where he's from. He comes from a little town called Tarshiha, which is في شمال Palestine, in the Galilee, and the whole town is a town of musicians. So he'd give me these video cassettes and tapes and things and whatnot. And once I heard it, I thought, this is to answer your other question about the wedding songs and stuff, is as soon as I heard this classical music, I realized, like, this is what's been missing in my life. I was learning all of the Kulthum, Abdul Wahab, Fairuz, Farid, the very popular music, but it was the classical music that Simone recorded on his album Turath that really, I became absorbed with it, and I picked up the oud, and I kind of never looked back. I was about maybe 17 years old.
Can you give me an example of sonically or musically how that stuff is different than maybe the stuff that you just played?
Sure. The closest link to this music that your listeners might be familiar with is a song called لما بدأ لما بدأ يتثنى لما بدأ يتثنى. So this is an example of a muwashah. Muwashahat are poems that really came out of Andalusia, Al-Andalus, between like the 10th to the 15th century, and we sing them to this day with newer composition in some cases. Now, that was really the start of a lot of the classical music, so much so that muwashah became a genre of music. But what I heard from Simone Shaheen was stuff that was standard in the conservatories of people learning classical Arab music in Syria, in Egypt, in Palestine, Lebanon, everywhere. And a lot of the compositions were actually Ottoman compositions. For example, there's a piece that Simone recorded called Sama'i Nahawand. And Sama'i is a form that I learned, that's very similar to Lamma Bada. It's in the same meter, which is 10/8. Sama'i Thaqil is the rhythm. And this form is basically on par with what you might compare to a sonata or a concerto or a symphony in Western music. Well, we have our own classical music. One of the pieces is called Sama'i Nahawand by the composer Mas'ud Jamil from the early 20th century. It goes like this. I'm not going to play the whole thing, obviously, because it's a 15-minute song. But here's like the first part. So things like that, classical pieces. There were composers like Riyad al-Simbati who composed in another form called longa, and he has a very popular classical piece called Longa Farah Faza, which goes kind of like this. I'm giving you little snippets here, but just to kind of give your listeners an idea. And these would be
That's
performed
amazing.
by a takht sharqi, which had qanun, ney, violin, riq, oud.
So I'm curious about maybe we'll use this the Diwan al-Han as a sort of jumping off point for all the different collaborations you have. It seems like this huge network of musicians and collaborators. Can you sort of help map out who all these people are? I mean, where are they? What are the sort of institutions and networks that connect all these people?
You know, I started off primarily in the Middle Eastern scene and working with, but also a diverse group of Middle Eastern musicians and North African musicians for that matter. I really got a lot of tutelage and mentorship from Tunisian musicians that my father used to play with. Hamad Saleh Harakati, used to work for Al-Idha'a Al-Tunsiya, Najib Bahri, who is a wonderful percussionist that I've worked with. And from that, I got exposed to a lot of more music that we don't necessarily always hear fil mashraq. For example, I played a little bit of Marsoul al-Hub from Abdel Wahab Dukkali, who's the Moroccan singer. But I wanted to get deeper into that, and so I started to learn a little bit more Tunisian music, and I started to learn a little bit more Moroccan Arab Andalusian music. And those things really started to resonate with me, not only musically, but also historically, to show wow, mashallah, yani, there is a very deep, deep history of music throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And so I started to get deeper into some of the Andalusian music and performing with, when he came here, Jalal Shakara, who is the grandson of, the grandnephew of Abdel Sadiq Shakara, who created a revival of Arab Andalusian music. And that kind of started me on a trajectory of digging deeper into Spanish music. So I lived in France for a couple of years. I moved there after the second Iraq War in 2003 because I just needed to clear my head and not be exposed to a lot of the propaganda that I was going to start seeing here in the United States. And the reason I bring that up, though, is because that was also a transition point in my life from going from the corporate world to doing nothing but music. And at the time, I brought back my old percussion days and brought back my drum skills and performed with a punk circus marching band here in Chicago called Mukapatsa. And we did that for a very long time. If you look them up, I mean, it's a 30-piece marching band, but I would bring arrangements to the group. I brought to the group Abdul Halim's Atoba, for example, for brass instruments. And I just was trying to find my way. My brother and I, throughout all of our lives in Chicago, have always played rock and roll as well. So we actually had a rock band. We would play out alongside when we were doing the Middle Eastern stuff. And then
Different type of weddings.
different type completely. It wasn't even weddings. It was bars and clubs. But we were playing like heavy rock, you know. And I remember we were very influenced by a group like System of the Down. System of a Down was an all-Armenian group, and we thought, wow, we're hearing this Middle Eastern rock and roll. And now, you know, mashallah, they're ubiquitous, especially out of Lebanon. Groups like Mashru' Layla, AF11, and a variety of different groups. And then I put together this kind of quote-unquote world music group that called Lama Jamal. And we covered a lot of music from the Balkans all the way to North Africa. So we played Greek music, we played Turkish music, a lot of Turkish music, a lot of Lebanese music, Egyptian music, North African. It was kind of like a gamut of different things. And this was at a time in the early 2000s that, you know, the term and the genre of world music was becoming very popular. And so we were very busy, you know, representing various cultures. And then as I started to get deeper into more the Andalusian music and the music of North Africa and Spanish music, and Indian music for that matter, because I do as much theater as I do music. And I was asked to do a theatrical production. Well, I was asked to do the Jungle Book, the Disney's Jungle Book here in Chicago. And I was asked to kind of, by the director, because I worked with her for a very long time. Her name is Mary Zimmerman. We did Arabian Nights together. We did a play called Mirror of the Invisible World, which was an old Persian tale. And throughout that, I started to discover different instruments, different styles of music. And so I would seek out people who played those styles. So, for example, if I brought Indian tabla or Indian dholak and started playing that on stage with the theater production, I went and sought out an instructor to teach me that. And when he found out I had a recording studio, he came to my house one day with 2 garbage bags full of cassette tapes and said, learn all of these songs. And I said, you know, I want to learn all of the songs that people listen to in India the same way that people resonate with songs in Egypt or in the Middle East. What are those songs that, you know, invoke those memories? And so I started playing out with him as well, and playing with Indian music. And when we did the Jungle Book, I was asked to kind of contract a group that was half the group was jazz musicians and the other half was Indian musicians. And so I ended up playing with them, and we forged a group outside of the play. And I was asked by the Veena player if I would like to join her group called Surabhi Ensemble. And in that group, what we focused on was how Al-Andalus becomes like an endpoint for music from Africa, North Africa, from the Middle East, from India, from Rajasthan, and then the flamenco traditions. So that's another one of the groups that I kind of work with. And then, you know, you just become polyvalent, as they would say, you know, multi-purpose. You kind of, you pick up different things. And I use the oud primarily as my instrument, but I, you know, play Indian music, Qawwali music on the oud. Allahu, 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 Allahu. You know, things from a variety of different styles. And then, of course, you know, playing rock and roll and branching out into different genres and being a music producer. I mean, I work with all kinds of genres of music. I met Omar Offendum at an Arabic language conference we were doing at Northwestern University. And he just kind of saw the oud. He said, hey, you know, I've always dreamed of having oud along with my poetry, along with what, you know, I'm doing. You know, would you be free to join me? And so I said, absolutely. You know, I've listened to hip hop all my life as well. And I really, really appreciated and dug what Omar was doing with the language, with the music genre. And, you know, I'm anti-purist anything, you know. Art is a form of expression, and if you want to continue to express, you keep up with the times. Now, that's no knock against anybody who sticks to one form or not. But I'm curious, and I'm an ethnographer, you know, so I want to see how other musics function and the sphere that they revolve in. And hip hop has proven to be, one of those really extremely important genres of music to the Arab cause, to the Arab voice. We do it so well, and it just fits so seamlessly into how we view music. It's almost like neo zajal. And so we started working, and then he told me he had this idea of talking about the Arab American experience. And we had a residency at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, to come and put together this production that we wrote together called Little Syria. And it talked about the mass migration in the late 19th, early 20th century of Arab Americans to New York and throughout the United States. It's been an exceptional journey performing with them. But I, also still produce other music. Like I produced, I think one of your other guests was here, Karim Nagy. I produced his album, Huzam Ensemble, and I perform on the album as well. So it doesn't stop. I'm playing with a jazz ensemble on Sunday that is coming from France, that is called the Bridge Project, which there's a connection between Chicago and Paris of musicians, and we just kind of do these exchange programs. So it doesn't stop anywhere.
Yeah, so I'm curious about like evolution, right? So you were talking about like Al-Andalus and this sort of meeting point. Musically, or artistically, period. As an observer, I feel like with migration, people end up sort of iterating and experimenting in different ways, and then you get all these offshoots, right? So like salsa from Colombia is different than from Cuba, and it's different than Miami is different than the stuff that's happening in the Bronx, and it's different than the stuff that's happening in LA. And if you hear like salsa music coming out of like Japan, it's really, really different. And you can say the same thing about jazz, and you can say that's definitely the same thing about hip hop. Do you think there is an Arab American sound when it comes to playing music?
That's a very good question. The short answer I can say is yes. I'm kind of like living proof of that in some ways. Because my brother and I, when we had our rock bands, we were really trying to incorporate a lot more Arab sounds and melodies and all of these sorts of things. And I even had quarter tones on my guitar. Just a quick shout out to the show itself.
Yeah.
And we were playing with Middle Eastern quarter tones. And for those who don't know what quarter tones are, الربع السيكا بالموسيقى الشرقية in Arab music is almost a defining characteristic or feature. They're the notes that exist between the black and white keys on a piano. So if it's like a major scale is or a minor scale, a quarter tone sounds like this. And these are tones that you find in maqam music throughout Orthodox churches, Christian, Muslim adhan and tajweed. Even in Jewish Middle Eastern synagogues, they use the same music theory. These are the songs that my grandmother would use and sing, the scale, the quarter tone, in growing up. So that became part of my Arab American experience.
Yeah.
But as there's
I think what I'm kind of asking, Ronnie, is not necessarily about in genres that are not considered sort of traditional Arabic music, but I'm imagining like I'm imagining you doing 1,000 wedding gigs, right? You and your brothers and your dad and this community of very proficient, serious musicians, right? Who are taking the craft seriously and trying to perform with some sort of fidelity to the art form as they see it. But one way or another, after 1,000 shows in that semi-closed community, it's going to iterate and sort of remix itself into some sort of other evolution. And I wonder if that sort of, if Arabic classical music sounds different over time when very excellent musicians are given the opportunity to express themselves over time, and it sort of shifts.
I think this point is much more relevant when we're talking about popular music. If we're talking
Okay.
about popular music, definitely, اللي زي ما بيقولوا اللي ضارب في البلاد يمكن مش ضارب هون لسه, so it might take some time. But in this day and age now, it's, with internet and all of these things, it's much faster. But back then, people traded through cassette tapes and CDs. So whatever cassette tapes made their way here, that became the repertoire that we used, even though it wasn't necessarily what was there. But when we would announce things like saying that it's cutting edge, this is what they're doing in the wedding overseas, we would start doing it here as well. But that's not to discount what other musicians were also doing here in terms like, for example, Amir Safar, a wonderful trumpetist, Iraqi trumpeter who lived in Oak Park here, took on jazz, and that became his form of expression. But he also missed his roots and went to Iraq and studied Iraqi maqam and came back and incorporated that into his American sound. You have an endless supply of hip-hop artists in America right now, exploring the Arab American experience through hip-hop. But, back in those days, it depends on the era. If we're talking about the early 2000s and before, things moved a little bit slower. The internet was not as ubiquitous. And so, yes, that short answer would be you did generate a particular ethos of your own American music. I played Greek music with a Greek band for a long time, and the clarinetist sent me a list of songs once. And I'm just thinking, oh, we're going to play Greek songs, right? And he actually separated them. And he said, here's Greek songs. And then he wrote on top, North American Greek songs. And I thought, oh, okay, why North American? He said, well, many of the migrants that came here, they stayed stuck in the traditions that they were accustomed to and used to hearing, the nostalgia of what they were used to hearing. And I thought, oh, let me apply that to the Arab experience and Arabic music. And it kind of worked both ways.
What are North American Arab songs?
North American Arab songs. At that time, it was the very, very popular stuff. But it would be still popular here, kind of like
for example, let's go through a few of them.
George Wassouf, for example. Let's say when George Wassouf's albums first came out, for example, what was the song? When this came out, we like beat it to death. It was already gone and done overseas. People are like, he's got 3 albums out, and people were still asking for it here. People were still asking for old Raghab Alama songs like Tawam Ruhi, Albi Ashikha, even Ya Reit Fiha Khab, it's like, wow. And today, what's really interesting is to see how they're coming back. They're becoming very retro, and I'm actually getting asked to play some of these songs by a younger generation who connects to them in a different way now. And it's not so much in the way of, oh, this is the new song. It's more like, this is the song that my parents had, at their wedding. This is a song that my father knows, or some form of nostalgia, but they're reconnecting to such roots through the music in that way. So it's very interesting.
That's cool. Have you ever played weddings outside North America?
Yes. I mean, my first visit to Palestine, I took my keyboards with me, and I had already established some relationships with musicians from there who had come here. And so I played a wedding not far from my home in Betunia, which is near Ramallah in the West Bank. And I went up to the Galilee, and we played together over there as well. Yeah, so it happens.
Can I ask you, Ronnie, who's on your sort of who's your top 5 dead or alive Arab composers?
Oh, composers? Well, I can
or like musicians. Let's say musicians, composers.
I can quickly name the ones that really, truly, truly influenced me, that I obsessed over. The first I would have to say is Muhammad Abdul Wahab. Muhammad Abdul Wahab had a profound influence on my upbringing, because I saw him do kind of what we're talking about now. He starts off with a very traditional sense, slowly starts to expand to a popular style of music, and then builds on that and starts incorporating keyboard, guitar, accordion, and I really appreciated his way of creating arrangements and orchestration. On a more jazzy tip, I would have to next say Baligh Hamdi. Baligh Hamdi was definitely one of a huge influence on me to see how can I expand on the traditional more than Abdul Wahab in a very jazzy kind of way. And then, I mean, obviously, every musician was influenced by the Rahbanis, not just the brothers, but also Ziyad. It's funny you asked this question, too, because quite often people would say, I listen to Fairuz, or I listen to Abdul Wahab, or Abdul Halim, or Kulthum. And I would say, yeah, I listen to the composers that write that music, and I would follow those composers. So, and of course, people like Zakaria Ahmed and Riyad al-Simbati. But I would say from a newer perspective, I was, very influenced by, recently, I'd say, too, like oud players like Ahmed al-Khatib, who is a Palestinian oud player who is phenomenal, and really incorporates a lot of Western classical music, but still has the sound of the traditional Arab sound. Gosh, there's so many to name. You said the top 5. I kind of give you 4 right there. I'd say another would be Omar al-Batsh. Omar al-Batsh is a 19th century composer who wrote most of the muwashahat that we hear, like Ali Khalil Qabbani as well. These are early composers of the Arab music tradition that kept me rooted in that sound and in that theory, but that didn't mean I stayed away from other ones like Shakir Muji and Muhammad al-Mugi. These were all very influential composers, I would say, in my life.
Can I ask you? Okay, before I move on to that question, I want to ask you about that 19th century composer. How do we know those songs? I mean, they were originally written down in original, were they widely performed, or do we have just original manuscripts that then become super popular after the advent of the record and sort of TV and radio?
So, I mean, this is around the time when recording is becoming popular, like turn of the 20th century.
Okay.
But let's also keep in mind that a great deal of the whole swath of the Middle Arabic-speaking world was really under Ottoman rule as well. And because the music was also evolving, maqam music was also evolving under Ottoman rule, a lot of the music styles that we were hearing coming out of Syria, for example, like the violinist Sami Shawwa, for example, and they were playing with what sounds very similar to Ottoman style. And the reason I just bring this up too is that it was around the late 19th century to the 20th century that a lot of music was being transcribed into Western standard notation. And by the 1930s, there was a huge conference in Cairo about notation, about Arab music in general. But there has always been a long-standing scholarship, whether it was oral, passed on. I mean, if we look to Halab, for example, I mean, قمة الموسيقى العربية يعني كتير من الموسيقى العربية موجودة بالحلب مثلا, but also the composers, and they took great care in notating, in transcribing, and يحافظوا عليها لدرجة إنه we have a lot of books. One of the most prolific transcribers from mid 20th century would be Abd al-Rahman Jabakji, for example, and he transcribed a lot of music from Egypt, from Syria, from everywhere. A lot of it became oral, and a lot of it was also eventually recorded, even if it was on like wax cylinders or on records.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you. You remember in your father's band, somebody came up to you and said you just have to learn 10 songs.
Yes.
Do you remember what these 10 songs are? Like, what are the first 10 songs a aspiring young musician has to learn?
Well, I already knew a lot of songs because I was playing guitar at the time, and I had
Yeah.
already been playing guitar for about 4 years with the band. But the songs I really focused on, I asked them what they were going to do. One song that I'll never forget is Saadun Jabir, Ya Tuyur al-Ta'ira. And part of the reason was because at that time that all this was happening, and he came up to me and said this, my dad's band had brought Saadun Jabir to Chicago. And I can honestly say I think that's the very first concert I ever experienced in my life. And
Do you
Fairuz,
still remember
Nassim
it?
Alain al-Hawa. Yeah, a little bit, yeah. يا طيور الطايرة روح الهلي يا شمسنا الدايرة ضوّلها لي. Man, loved that song. That it was all older stuff. Kulthum, I had to learn Laylat Hub and Alf Layla. So and it goes on, and we had to learn طبعا أنا في انتظارك مليت أنا في انتظارك خليت ناري بضلوعي حطيت ايدي على خدي وعديت. The standards in that sense. قلبي يعشق كل جميل, because we were doing that as like a as an intro, and a lot of dance songs, because dance meaning belly dance, because dancers were part and parcel of all the nightclubs. But the music that they played was very classical, and it was composed. It was like these full suites of songs. So I had to learn a few of those. I already had kind of like some of the Palestinian stuff, but if we're talking about club music, those were the ones, and a lot of Iraqi music. Because Chicago has a huge Iraqi population, and a lot of the musicians we played with were actually Assyrian. They spoke Assyrian, which is Aramaic, basically. So I learned some of their music, but we would play a lot of Iraqi music, like Nadim al-Ghazali. We had to learn that. Mayhana, 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 غابت شمسنا So this is old stuff, right? I mean,
I love it.
yeah, but that's those are like some of the first songs. I actually, even for my undergrad kind of thesis project, I took the idea that he gave me at that age, and I created a book series that I'm working on right now called The 10 Essentials. And what I'm doing them is these are songs for cultural learning. And I said, just like he gave me those 10 songs, rather than create a big, compendium or indexed book of a lot of songs, I said, here are 10 songs. Here are a couple pages of the background of the politics, the culture, the language, who sang it, where it was from. And I transcribed the song, and I was doing one for each region, like 10 songs from Lebanon you need to know, 10 songs from Syria, 10 songs from Egypt. And I'd like to create obviously it's in the subjective, taste, but I'd like to create a series for each of those as well, and just kind of, if there are any people out there who would like to see a transcribed song, let me know.
Yeah.
And we'll put the book together, inshallah.
This sounds like a very good Afikra Academy project, to be honest.
Oh yeah, well, I think we've stumbled upon something really good here.
Yeah, so we have to have a conversation about that. If you're listening to this and you're interested in this type of project from Afikra Academy, please let us know, because this would be a really cool thing. We're doing something really similar, actually. So I think there's a collaboration that was just birthed.
Inshallah.
Okay, cool. It's interesting because you in the beginning when you were talking about your dad's band, you were saying there was all this diversity, right? To the untrained ear, that Iraqi song sounds just like the Egyptian song.
The difference, though, would be the rhythm. Like that.
So
song,
walk me through the difference. How do you know a song is Iraqi versus a song is Tunisian or Egyptian or Shami or whatever?
Well, the majority of them, if we're using traditional instruments, use the same instruments. Al-Oud, which originates in Iraq, goes westward, goes eastward, northward, and becomes this very popular instrument. Qanun as well, the iqa'at as well. The first thing that will tell you right away, where this is from is al-lahja, the dialect, the Arabic dialect.
Sure.
So you can right away, understand, okay, this is Iraqi, I'm hearing cha, I'm hearing ga, it's Iraqi. But musically speaking, one of the very first things that gives you an indication is the rhythms. Not so much the maqam as much as the rhythms as well. So, for example, if Egypt, you have a rhythm that goes maqsoom, or this is fil mashraq b'shakl am. It's like dum tak tak dum tak dum tak tak. Everybody knows this rhythm, right? And the variations of it, the baladi and whatnot. In Iraq, there are a lot of very specific rhythms that are indigenous to that particular region. For example, the most popular one that's become so popular they use it in Jordanian songs and Palestinian songs and Syrian debka songs. It's called chobiya. Dum 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 dak dum. And you know the song. شلونك عيني شلونك شو مخلى على عيونك شلونك عيني شلونك شو مخلى على جفونك شقد شفت عيوننا والله ما كحلو من عيونك. So that's the kind of stuff that immediately gives you an indication like, okay, that's full on Iraqi right there. But the piece that I played for you by Nazim al-Ghazali is in a very Iraqi rhythm called Georgina. And this rhythm exists pretty much only in Iraq and Turkish music as well. And it's not something that we're used to hearing from Mashraq, but little kids in Iraq know this rhythm. And it's dum tak 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 dum tak. يمل عيون السود ما جوز انا يمل عيون السود ما جوز انا خدت شلقي ما راقت ريق من هنا. I mean, it's very Iraqi. When you're hearing Egyptian stuff, obviously you know right away from the dialect, right? We're saying ga instead of ja. Lebanese music, again, I think the language is what really delineates what is what and where it's from. And طبعا Khaliji music is its own very special thing, but the language and the rhythms more than the melodies or the there are subtleties and nuances in the melodies, but the languages and the rhythms that become indigenous to these regions, that's really one of the best ways you can kind of tell.
Man, so cool. So I'm curious. I want to do one last question before we wrap up, which is, if you were to put together a Arabic ensemble supergroup from the past, okay?
Okay.
Who would and let's remove personalities.
For sure.
Would be in this supergroup? Who is the perfect Qanun player and the perfect this and the perfect that?
Oh man, that's so difficult to say. I mean, I'd probably name people too that others don't necessarily know either. And it depends on what kind of music. It depends on what kind of music we'd be talking about, right? Like, if we're talking about the classical takht style, I would definitely include Sharif Muhaddin Haidar, who was an oud player he was Turkish, but he moved to Iraq at the turn of the 20th century, and he was also a cellist, and he introduced new techniques to playing the oud, and he was also happened to be Munir Bashir's instructor. That would be somebody. Somebody else, and this would be interesting, is a guy by the name of Yusuf Zarur, who was a Jewish Iraqi Qanun player who played on all of the Iraqi music, but was a very well-known and renowned Qanunist. I would definitely have to dig into some of the North African stuff and maybe bring a violinist from Tunisia. I would probably definitely bring in Mohammed Saleh Harakati, the person I mentioned to you, who's now getting up there, but he was around in the 60s and the 70s. And goodness, percussionist, I'd probably bring Hankish, who played with everybody in Lebanon. He was Armenian, wonderful percussionist. Probably even include, somebody like Hassan Anwar, who played Ruq with Firqat al-Masiyah. I'd love to have Omar Khurshid on the guitar.
Nice.
Boy, it's an interesting question. I'd have to go back and review, like, what would happen if we put these people together.
Yeah. Who are some of your favorite vocalists? I mean, you haven't talked about vocalists much, but you've been singing throughout the episode. Who are some of your favorite vocalists?
I never considered myself a singer per se. I used to sing chorus behind all of the vocalists, and now, I mean, I can carry a tune for sure. Vocalists, it's hard. We played with so many. I'd say obviously, Kulthum, Fairuz, the well-known people. I really always appreciated Samira Tawfiq. Samira Tawfiq really, for me, captured the essence of Arabism, or this kind of rooted folky Arab sound. Wadi Safi for sure. I would say Warda al-Jazairiyya as well. And then if we get into the Tunisian and the North African, and this is something maybe your listeners can go back and listen to. There was a wonderful vocalist in Tunisia named Saliha, who was incredible. Abdel Sadiq Shkara, who is a Abdel Wahab Abdel Khayyat, who was a Moroccan vocalist as well, kind of sang in the 60s, 70s, this newer kind of era. Really lovely voice. Gosh, there's so many people. Rim Akhshish, Rim Benna, Sanat Musa. I just kind of listen to all of them for various different reasons, And there are so many people out there that, we become too enthralled in the Arab world with being starstruck by celebrityism, if you will. So often, أنت مشهور, أنت وين رحت, أنت سويت. It's like, أنا عمال, أنا من الشعب, okay? مش ضروري أنا أكون مشهور على مستوى العالم إن أكون relevant, because I've always liked to consider myself kind of somebody who is in the background, the part of the people who make the scenes. I think that's why I followed arrangers, I followed composers, I followed people, producers, people who really make things work. It's wonderful that, folks have, this reverence for the singer, whether it's Kulthum, Abdul Halim, Abdul Wahab, but very seldom are they ready to actually give credit or pay tribute to the unsung heroes that helped make all of those things, And so we're out there. We're still out there. The only thing I can really ask of everybody, too, is that, get over this thing of being celebrity or not celebrity. Everybody has a form of expression. And sometimes, I'll resonate with some of my students' work. I'll resonate with the work of local people here, or people who are really trying to do something, and I'll be like, wow, this is really something. And it's not necessarily popular just by virtue of, like, well, they're not always on social media. They're not always, they're spending more time honing their craft than they are trying to publicize themselves.
Yeah. That's a question. أنت مشهور?
That's a question, man. If I had a dime, like, أنا ما سمعتش عنك. مين أنت? It's just like,
I love it.
I got that before, I'm just like, well, في إشي اسمه Google. تفضلوا, go ahead and Google me. Like,
I love it. Ronnie, well, listen, I'm so happy that you were on. There are so many projects and things you're a part of. I highly, highly, highly encourage people to Google you, to check out your website, There's all these projects on YouTube. There's so much stuff to listen to. We're definitely going to put a article up on Daftar, showcasing some of this stuff and having it in our next Quarter Tones mixtape on Spotify and Rami. Ronnie, thanks so much. This was so much fun.
Mikey, I really appreciate it. Thank you, and I'm a huge fan of the program. And I was going through my emails. Just a quick shout out too. I was going through my emails, and the first time I actually heard about afikra is when you first came out, because my friend Mona Khalidi, who is the wife of Rashid Khalidi, sent me and a bunch of us a mass email, just really singing your praises and singing the praises of this show. And it's really an honor to be on here, and I'm so happy that you've created this global connection from Lebanon to the world, and highlighting and showcasing the wonderful riches of our culture. So thank you, and kudos to you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it wouldn't be done. It wouldn't be possible without dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people who make this work happen. So it's definitely not just me at all. So thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.